Welcome, the anointed ones. The moment someone important stops laughing and starts observing, the game has already changed. Here's a fact most people never hear out loud. At higher levels of power, curiosity is never casual. Nobody with real authority wastes attention. Time, focus, and fixation are currencies, and they are guarded more tightly than money. So when someone high up pauses, retraces steps, and starts connecting dots around you, it isn't flattery, it's recognition. And recognition at that altitude is rarely comfortable. What makes this unsettling is that you didn't announce yourself. You didn't campaign. You didn't posture. You were simply moving through life, minding your business, doing what you do. When suddenly, the spotlight shifted without warning. That's usually how it happens. Not with applause, but with silence that feels heavier than noise. The kind of silence where conversations change tone, emails get reread, and someone somewhere leans back and says, "Wait, run that again." There's a strange humor in it too, because the same people who would have ignored you last year are now acting like unpaid detectives, replaying moments, reinterpreting choices. Suddenly your luck looks strategic, your calm looks calculated, your restraint looks suspicious. It's almost funny watching realization arrive late, like someone finally reading the instructions after breaking the device. But here's the deeper layer most people miss. Fixation doesn't start because you're loud. It starts because something about you doesn't add up in their spreadsheets of human behavior. Your results don't match your supposed limitations. Your trajectory doesn't obey the usual friction. You didn't fracture where others did. And when systems encounter anomalies, they don't clap, they investigate. This isn't about ego or hype, it's about pattern disruption, about someone higher up realizing that the story they accepted no longer explains the outcome standing in front of them. And once that realization clicks, it doesn't unclick. Curiosity turns into monitoring. Interest turns into recalculation. And just like that, without permission or announcement, you become a point of focus. Stay with me, because what they noticed, why it bothers them, and what it actually means for you, is not what most people think. Number 1. They noticed the pattern break, not your personality. What set this off had nothing to do with charm, confidence, or how you carry yourself. It wasn't your tone, your energy, or your story. People at higher levels don't get distracted by surface traits. They track outcomes. They watch sequences. They pay attention to what repeats and what shouldn't be repeating. And in your case, something kept happening that wasn't supposed to happen. Your results didn't line up with your conditions. You came from a background, environment, or set of circumstances that normally produces a very specific kind of ending. Burnout, dependency, resentment, plateau. Instead, you stayed mentally intact. You kept learning, you kept adjusting, you didn't turn bitter, sloppy, or predictable. That's where the pattern broke. Systems are built on expectation. When someone like you moves through pressure without breaking in the usual places, it forces a pause. Not because you're special in a dramatic way, but because you disrupt forecasting. When outcomes can't be predicted, control weakens. That's the real issue. You didn't fail where the model said you should. What made this more noticeable is that you didn't compensate loudly. People who struggle and survive usually overcorrect. They become defensive, attention-seeking, or visibly hardened. You didn't. You remained stable. That stability under strain is rare, and it raises questions no one wants to ask publicly. They started reviewing the timeline. Small decisions, quiet pivots, moments where you chose restraint instead of reaction. None of it screamed ambition, yet all of it produced momentum. That contradiction is what pulled attention upward, not who you are, but how consistently you avoided the usual traps. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Pattern breaks are more threatening than rebels. Rebels still follow scripts, just inverted ones. You didn't rebel, you simply didn't collapse. You didn't spiral. You didn't play out the expected ending. And when someone high up realizes a person can move through pressure without absorbing damage, curiosity becomes unavoidable. Once that recognition lands, it changes how you're seen permanently. You stop being evaluated as a personality and start being studied as a variable, not because you demanded attention, but because the system can't explain you anymore. Number 2, you survived environments designed to erase people like you. Survival isn't always about skill, luck, or timing. Sometimes it's about enduring systems, situations, and people that are built to grind you down completely. Most people assume pressure simply tests endurance, but at higher levels, it's a filter. It's designed to weed out anyone who can't follow a predictable path, anyone whose mind and soul can't be contained. And you moved through it. You didn't just survive, you came out intact, and that's what makes them notice. These environments are subtle traps. They're not always overtly cruel. They often operate through expectation, judgment, and quiet sabotage. The rules are invisible, the consequences are slow, and the wear is cumulative. The ones who make it through without breaking are anomalies. They're not supposed to exist. People at the top know this. They see it happen very rarely, and when it does, it doesn't escape their attention. You didn't conform, yet you didn't fail. You maintained clarity when others lost direction, strength when others wilted, and perspective when others were consumed by the moment. That alone triggers fixation. Because systems rely on predictability. They want outcomes they can manipulate and control. You produced results without being part of the mechanism. That's uncomfortable for anyone used to managing outcomes, and it makes you fascinating to watch. Survival in these conditions isn't a story of endurance alone. It's a story of adaptation without compromise. You navigated without betraying your core, without showing cracks that could be exploited. You weren't the loud survivor. They expected noise, visible strain, concessions. You were quiet, precise, and unbroken. That's exactly why someone high up would start connecting dots. When they look at you, they don't see a person who happened to survive. They see someone who survived intact, someone who walked through a system designed to erase them and came out whole. That is rare. That is alarming. That is why attention shifts from casual observation to focused monitoring. Once survival becomes a statement of unexplainable consistency, you're no longer just another person. They start studying you as a variable they can't yet predict. Number 3, your thinking exposes flaws they can't publicly admit. The attention you're drawing isn't because you're loud, flashy, or confrontational. It's because your thinking does something most people can't manage. It quietly reveals cracks in systems, decisions, and narratives that others spend years trying to keep hidden. You don't do it aggressively. You don't broadcast it. You simply process information in a way that highlights inconsistencies and oversights, and when someone high up notices it, it becomes impossible to ignore. People in positions of authority operate with layers of control, pretense, and assumption. They build processes, issue instructions, and create rules that look seamless from the outside, but in reality, every structure has weak points. Most individuals either miss them or are too intimidated to point them out. You, on the other hand, see what others miss without trying to be a disruptor. Your analysis isn't framed as critique, it's clarity, and clarity in systems designed to appear flawless is a threat. It's subtle. When you speak, your reasoning doesn't scream rebellion, but it leaves little gaps where the flaws become obvious. Someone listening begins to mentally retrace steps, double-check decisions, and revisit actions they assumed were unquestionable. That internal conflict is what makes them fixated. They can't admit the flaws publicly because it would undermine authority, credibility, and reputation. Yet every time they encounter your perspective, the cracks widen just enough to demand attention. This is why fixation forms without provocation. You're not consciously attacking the system, but your thought patterns expose the truth behind the facade. They can't manipulate, ignore, or redirect it without risking acknowledgement that they miscalculated. And the higher up you go, the less they can tolerate anomalies. They depend on belief in their own infallibility. By simply thinking differently, by seeing the unseen, you become a variable they must track. Not a rebel, not a challenger, but a mirror showing exactly where their structures wobble. That makes them obsessed, not with your intentions, but with your capacity to reveal realities they've worked hard to hide. It's rare, uncomfortable, and impossible to unsee once recognized. Number 4. They realized you weren't trained, yet you outperformed the trained. What catches the attention of someone high up isn't just results, it's how those results are achieved. When a person steps into complex systems, high-stakes environments, or situations that demand skill, most rely on formal training, mentorship, and established pathways. That's how organizations expect people to operate. You didn't follow the script. You weren't molded or groomed. Yet somehow, your decisions, timing, and execution consistently outpaced those who were. That alone is enough to make someone pause and take notice. It's unsettling because it defies logic. Training creates predictability. It's a way to standardize thinking so outcomes can be anticipated. When someone achieves more without the same foundation, it throws predictions off balance. The trained are expected to lead, to excel, to succeed. You exceeded that expectation without the framework, which forces a realization. What you've done is not replicable, not by the same rules, not by the same methodology. That unpredictability commands focus. They start tracing your steps. Every choice, every pivot, every calm decision under pressure is dissected. How did you know what to do when everyone else hesitated? How did you read patterns without prior instruction? They notice efficiency where others show hesitation, insight where others show rote understanding. That creates a fixation because it undermines the comfort of control. If someone untrained can surpass the trained, it suggests gaps in their own system. It isn't arrogance or luck. It's intuitive mastery layered with discipline and clarity. You haven't just survived, you've excelled in ways that should have been improbable. And that improbability is irresistible to observe. Someone high up realizes you're operating on a plane that isn't supposed to exist in their framework, and their attention locks in. This is why fixation begins. They're not simply impressed, they're unsettled. Because in noticing you, they're forced to acknowledge that their metrics, their training programs, and their assumptions about capability have exceptions, and you are that exception, rare, unplanned, and impossible to ignore. Number 5. You adapt faster than hierarchies can respond. One of the most unsettling things for someone high up isn't defiance or noise, it's speed. Systems, hierarchies, and bureaucracies are built to anticipate, control, and respond. Every rule, every protocol, every layer of approval exists to manage outcomes. You, however, don't wait for permission, instruction, or validation. You move first, you adjust instinctively, you respond to change before the system even realizes it has to react. And that difference in tempo is impossible to ignore. When someone sees that happening, it triggers an immediate, almost visceral curiosity. They notice that by the time they've mobilized, accounted for variables, or called a meeting, you've already found another route, solved a problem, or avoided a trap entirely. Their frameworks, designed to map and contain human behavior, fail in real time because you're operating outside the expected cadence. That's what fixation starts to look like. It isn't admiration. It's the recognition that their control is not absolute, that unpredictability exists in a form they can't easily influence. Adaptation at that speed isn't random. It's clarity. It's a combination of observation, understanding, and the ability to anticipate outcomes without needing external cues. You don't just react, you evolve strategically, and the results appear seamless because you're always 2 steps ahead of the system's ability to constrain you. That makes you fascinating to someone who depends on predictability, because unpredictability is a variable they have to track continuously. There's also an understated intimidation in speed. People in positions of authority rarely deal with anyone who consistently operates faster than the mechanisms they control. When it happens, it demands constant attention, not because you're aggressive or loud, but because your presence reshapes timelines, decisions, and expectations. By the time they realize the pattern, the fixation has already taken hold. You aren't a challenge. They can't even define the challenge clearly. You are simply moving faster than the rules and the people enforcing them, and that velocity is enough to make someone in power study you endlessly, trying to map what cannot be fully mapped. Number 6. You don't seek validation, which makes influence uncontrollable. What really unsettles people in positions of authority isn't talent, skill, or intelligence. It's independence. Most individuals can be guided, steered, or influenced because they crave approval. They operate within visible frameworks of reward and recognition. You don't. You aren't performing for acknowledgement or chasing anyone's approval, and that makes your influence unpredictable, uncontrollable, and frankly, unnerving to watch. People who depend on control expect to manage outcomes by leveraging desire. Praise, position, and status are tools to manipulate behavior. You render those tools useless. By existing outside of that system, your actions can't be anticipated. You aren't bound by need, fear, or the expectation of reward, and that freedom creates a force they cannot measure or contain. It's not about arrogance, it's about self-sufficiency. That self-sufficiency shifts how power perceives you, turning casual observation into focused, sometimes obsessive, attention. The fixation begins subtly. They notice the small things first: how you make decisions without consulting the crowd, how you stand firm when others bend, how you ignore gossip, agendas, and pressure without even signaling defiance. Each act, simple as it seems, communicates a message louder than any argument. You cannot be steered by standard influence. And that message is impossible to dismiss, because it's effective without being aggressive. Your autonomy doesn't just protect you, it amplifies your presence. Influence spreads differently when it isn't being broadcast or manipulated. People respond to authenticity, consistency, and clarity of purpose, and because you embody these without seeking validation, your impact is both subtle and undeniable. The ones in power recognize this instinctively. They know that if they try to control you, the effort will be wasted, and yet they can't stop monitoring, tracking, and analyzing what you're doing, because you defy the patterns they rely on. By not needing approval, you become untouchable in ways most people can't understand. They can't dictate your direction, and that lack of control is disorienting. You exist outside their leverage, and that freedom alone commands attention, scrutiny, and ultimately, fixation. Number 7. You ask questions that force ethical discomfort. The kind of attention you're drawing isn't because you argue loudly or challenge authority with obvious defiance. It's because of the subtle, precise way you approach reality. Your questions aren't designed to provoke, they're designed to illuminate. You notice inconsistencies, gaps, and contradictions, and instead of pointing fingers, You ask the kind of questions that make people face truths they would rather ignore. That ability is disarming, unnerving, and impossible to overlook for someone high up. These questions don't exist in the realm of opinion or debate. They operate in fact, logic, and timing. They highlight where assumptions fail, where ethics have been bent, and where decisions don't align with stated intentions. The discomfort they create isn't accidental. It's a natural byproduct of clarity in a space built on compromise, shortcuts, or self-preservation. And people in power can't laugh it off or redirect it easily because it exposes their own inconsistencies without being confrontational. What makes this fixation forming is the precision. Your questions don't insult or attack. They don't demand public reckoning. They simply shine a light on the areas where reality and pretense diverge. Someone observing begins to notice patterns, how you see what others miss, how you force awareness without making noise, how a single question can ripple through decisions, meetings, and strategies. Each ripple reminds them that there is a mind at work that doesn't adhere to expectation or control. Your ability to generate ethical discomfort is coupled with restraint, which amplifies its effect. It isn't the frequency of your questions that captivates attention, it's the consequence of each one. Each inquiry lands where it matters, and suddenly someone high up has to consider not just what you're asking, but what it implies about the systems and people around you. That is why you command focus without trying. You've learned how to expose the cracks in structure and principle without shouting, and that combination makes you simultaneously invisible and impossible to ignore. Once someone notices it, the fixation begins, because this kind of mental precision cannot be ignored or contained. Number 8. Your restraint signaled capacity, not weakness. Restraint is one of the most misunderstood signals in any environment. Most people read it as hesitation, indecision, or lack of strength. They assume that if someone isn't reacting aggressively or lashing out, they must be limited, constrained, or incapable of impact. That assumption is exactly what makes restraint such a powerful and often terrifying signal when it's genuine. In your case, your calm, measured approach under pressure wasn't weakness. It was a demonstration of capacity so clear that someone high up couldn't ignore it. They began noticing the pattern early. Situations designed to provoke or trap you failed to elicit the expected reaction. They expected tension, frustration, or visible compromise, but you didn't give them the script. You maintained clarity, control, and composure. Every decision you made, every pause you took, communicated something that words couldn't. You were capable of far more than what was visible, and you knew exactly when to exercise force and when to hold it back. That subtlety unsettled them because it implied power they hadn't accounted for. What makes this fixation forming is the invisible weight of restraint. People in authority are conditioned to manage outcomes by observing behavior. They anticipate the moments when someone will crack, react, or overextend. When those moments never come, when restraint replaces reaction, it forces a reevaluation of capability. Suddenly, the person they assumed was predictable or manageable becomes unknowable. They can no longer chart a clear course because your capacity isn't measured by noise or aggression, it's measured by what you choose not to use, which is always more than they expected. Restraint also amplifies perception. Every move, every pause, every silent calculation starts to carry meaning far beyond the immediate context. Someone high up begins to track, analyze, and overthink because they know that when you finally act, it will be deliberate, precise, and impactful. They realize your patience isn't passivity, it's a reservoir of power that once released cannot be underestimated. Your restraint turned observation into fixation because it revealed a depth of capacity that others couldn't immediately quantify, control, or predict. That is the kind of calm that changes how you are seen, making you a force even without taking action. Number 9. You understand power without craving proximity to it. Most people measure success by how close they can get to authority, influence, or control. They chase positions, titles, or recognition because those are the visible indicators of power. You operate differently. You understand power on a structural, almost instinctual level without needing to inhabit it or display it. That alone is enough to make someone high up take notice because they realize you're not playing by their rules, and that makes you inherently unpredictable and difficult to manipulate. Your understanding isn't theoretical. You can see how influence flows, where pressure points exist, and which levers matter, yet you aren't tempted to pull them for personal gain. Most hierarchies thrive on the illusion that power is something to possess, a thing to display. You demonstrate mastery over it simply by navigating situations strategically and calmly, without seeking credit or control. That detachment is disorienting to people who rely on hierarchy to gauge competence. They start observing not your actions alone, but your absence of desire for approval, attention, or position. Every choice you make shows that you operate from clarity and awareness rather than ego or ambition. That independence signals that your influence cannot be bought, steered, or confined. People in authority are accustomed to shaping narratives around ambition. They can predict and manage those who crave proximity to power. You are not one of them, and that inability to categorize you creates fascination and, often, fixation. Your presence subtly shifts dynamics. Rooms, conversations, and decisions recalibrate around you, not because you demand it, but because your understanding of power changes how people behave without realizing it. You operate in the space between influence and autonomy, and that liminal space is unnerving. It forces those high up to study you, analyze your moves, and attempt to anticipate actions that are inherently unpredictable. By understanding power without needing it, you become a force outside the conventional system. That independence, precision, and clarity create a magnetic focus from those who want to control, predict, or contain outcomes. They fixate not on what you are doing, but on what you could do, and the realization that it may never align with their expectations keeps their attention locked on you. Number 10. You didn't internalize the narrative meant for you. Every system, every organization, and every hierarchy comes with a story already written for those who pass through it. Expectations are quietly assigned, roles, limitations, outcomes, even failures are pre-scripted. Most people accept these narratives without questioning them, either out of fear, convenience, or habit. You didn't. You observed the story, understood it, and deliberately chose not to internalize it. That refusal alone makes someone high up pay attention, because it disrupts the control they assume is absolute. Not internalizing a narrative doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means seeing it as it is, not as someone else wants you to. You didn't conform to expectations, you didn't perform for approval, and you didn't pretend to fit a mold. Every step you took, every decision you made, silently communicated that you were not a predictable element in their system. That unpredictability triggers fascination and fixation because it forces observers to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about control, compliance, and outcome. Your actions exposed a critical truth. The story they assigned doesn't define reality. It's a framework built to manage people who are willing to be managed. You weren't. You didn't rebel with noise or aggression, but your very existence challenged assumptions. Decisions they assumed would follow their narrative didn't. Your trajectory diverged from their expectations at every turn. That divergence isn't just noticed, it is dissected, analyzed, and tracked relentlessly. The power in this is subtle but undeniable. By not internalizing the assigned story, you operate in a space where freedom, clarity, and strategy converge. You are not reacting to the script, You are authoring your own path within the same environment. This signals to someone high up that you cannot be controlled in conventional ways, and that realization is both unnerving and captivating. They become fixated because you are living proof that the human element cannot be fully predicted or programmed. You exist outside the expected narrative, which makes your every move a variable they must study. That is why your presence is simultaneously invisible to the casual observer and impossible for authority to ignore. Number 11. Your integrity stayed intact under incentives to compromise. Integrity is more than a word. It's a test that only shows up under pressure. Most people think of integrity as a static trait, but the truth is, it reveals itself in moments when bending, compromising, or yielding could bring immediate gain or safety. You didn't bend. You didn't compromise. Even when every system, person, or situation offered temptation, whether for recognition, advantage, or convenience, you remained consistent. That level of unshakable integrity doesn't go unnoticed by someone high up. It triggers fixation because it's rare and impossible to control. People in positions of authority are accustomed to predictability through leverage. They know how incentives, pressure, and fear shape decisions. They understand the way most individuals respond to reward or threat. You didn't respond the way they expected. That alone sends alarms because it exposes the limits of their influence. When someone consistently chooses principle over gain, it makes them reassess the rules they assume govern behavior. Suddenly, they're confronted with a variable they can't manipulate. Integrity under temptation also amplifies perception. Every choice you make begins to carry weight beyond the immediate context. Others notice patterns, the calm consistency, the refusal to be swayed, the ability to hold a position quietly but firmly. That consistency is magnetic to observers because it signals both strength and discipline. It proves that influence isn't about force, coercion, or manipulation. It's about values that cannot be compromised. What makes this fixation forming is the invisible power it creates. You aren't loud, aggressive, or confrontational, but your unwavering principles affect decisions, strategy, and perception around you. Someone high up can't ignore it because it directly challenges their assumptions about control. It also subtly reshapes the environment. You become the standard by which others are measured, even when no one says it aloud. By maintaining integrity where most would falter, you reveal a kind of consistency and strength that demands observation. They fixate because someone who cannot be influenced through incentives is not just rare. They are unknowable within systems designed to predict and manage human behavior. Number 12. You carry information without broadcasting it. The kind of attention you're attracting isn't about what you say, it's about what you know and how you handle it. Most people reveal knowledge, whether intentionally or not, through conversation, behavior, or oversight. You don't. You absorb, process, and understand far more than most people realize, and you don't feel the need to announce it. That quiet possession of understanding makes someone high up both curious and cautious because it's impossible to predict what you will do with it, or if you even need to do anything at all. People in authority are trained to watch signals, patterns, and indicators. They rely on outward cues to map intentions, gauge knowledge, and estimate influence. You disrupt that process by carrying insight without signaling it. When someone notices it, fixation begins, not out of admiration, but because you have become an unquantifiable variable. The information you hold, the understanding you possess, exists outside their control, and they can't manipulate or anticipate it. The subtlety of your knowledge makes it powerful. It shapes decisions and outcomes simply by existing. You don't leverage it for attention, you don't flaunt it for influence, and you don't reveal it unnecessarily. That restraint signals competence and depth without saying a word, and people in higher positions instinctively recognize the danger and the rarity of someone operating this way. Fixation forms because they are forced to constantly reassess the situation. Every interaction, every observation, and every minor detail is analyzed to estimate what you know, how you think, and what you might do. You are essentially an unknown quantity who has already accumulated enough insight to change the rules if you choose to. That unpredictability, combined with the silent weight of knowledge, creates both intrigue and caution in equal measure. By carrying understanding without broadcasting it, you control your environment subtly but profoundly. You become a center of gravity, not because you demand it, but because people cannot ignore the potential you embody. That potential, concealed yet undeniable, is what keeps them watching, analyzing, and fixated, long after most others would have faded from attention. Number 13. Your presence changes group dynamics unintentionally. There's a quiet power in the way you exist in a room, and it doesn't come from speaking louder, moving faster, or asserting yourself. It comes from the subtle authority of competence, clarity, and restraint. When you enter a space, people shift, sometimes without even realizing it. Conversations tighten, body language adjusts, and agendas subtly bend around your presence. This isn't manipulation. It's an effect that naturally radiates from someone who operates with precision and awareness, and it doesn't take long for someone high up to notice it. What makes this magnetic and unsettling is that it's unintentional. You're not trying to dominate or control, yet influence spreads simply by being. People react differently around you. Some become cautious, others reveal more than they intended, and certain dynamics accelerate or stall entirely. It's the kind of subtle recalibration that exposes truths about how groups function, and when someone in power realizes this, it can't be ignored. They start analyzing patterns, which interactions change, how decisions shift, and which individuals respond differently depending on your presence. Your impact isn't loud, but it's undeniable. The energy in a room is not just the sum of what's said or done. It's shaped by perception, awareness, and competence. You influence all three without effort, and that creates a variable high-level observers find irresistible. This attention becomes fixation because your presence challenges predictability. People in positions of authority rely on consistent patterns to maintain control, and when one person alters those patterns simply by existing, it raises alarms. You are not actively interfering, yet your ability to shift dynamics shows them that you cannot be categorized, controlled, or predicted in the ways they are used to. By unintentionally changing group behavior, you become an invisible force that shapes outcomes without claiming credit. That power, coupled with its subtlety, draws attention and study. Someone high up becomes fixated, not because you demand it, but because your presence consistently produces results they can't fully explain, predict, or contain. And that is a rare and unnerving phenomenon in any system. Number 14. They're fixated because you represent an uncontrollable variable. What makes someone high up fixate isn't charisma, visibility, or even skill. It's unpredictability. You exist outside the patterns they expect, outside the models they rely on, and outside the influence they can exert. In systems built on predictability and control, the presence of someone who cannot be contained becomes impossible to ignore. You are that person. You're the variable they cannot calculate, the element they cannot manipulate, and the outcome they cannot anticipate. This fixation begins quietly. They notice that their usual levers, pressure, expectation, reward, or threat, don't work on you. Decisions that would bend others fail. Attempts to influence or control are met with calm, calculated moves they didn't see coming. Their systems, built for compliance and predictability, fail to capture your trajectory, and that failure is the spark that drives their attention. What they initially register as curiosity quickly deepens into study, observation, and a subtle, relentless focus. The weight of this uncontrollable variable is immense because it forces them to reconsider everything they think they know. You don't follow the scripts they've written for others. You don't behave according to their assumptions. Every move you make introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is uncomfortable for those who measure influence, power, and outcomes. The more they try to map or predict you, the more evident it becomes that you cannot be mapped, and that realization is both alarming and compelling. Your unpredictability isn't chaos, it's deliberate awareness, precision, and clarity. You understand the systems around you, yet you operate independently of them, which creates a tension that draws focus naturally. Your presence alone reshapes calculations, decisions, and behavior in ways they cannot control, and that is exactly why fixation forms. They are obsessed not with what you do in isolation, but with the potential of what you could do. You represent freedom of action, clarity of thought, and strategic independence in a space designed to limit all three. That combination of awareness and autonomy makes you a variable that cannot be neutralized, a force that must be studied, and a person whose trajectory they will track as long as it remains unpredictable. Conclusion. Everything we've explored here points to a single, undeniable truth. When someone high up starts connecting the dots about you, it isn't random. It isn't flattery, coincidence, or curiosity for its own sake. It's recognition, a deep, instinctual acknowledgement that you operate outside the systems, expectations, and scripts that most people are bound to. You survive pressure that would break others. You think in ways that reveal flaws no one else dares to notice, and you navigate power without needing it. You carry knowledge quietly, act with restraint, and influence spaces without trying. Every one of these qualities turns ordinary observation into fixation, and that fixation isn't something that fades. It grows as your presence continues to defy predictability. You have become the variable that cannot be controlled, the pattern that cannot be forced, and the force that cannot be predicted. Those who thought they understood influence, outcomes, and human behavior now have to pause, analyze, and recalibrate because you exist. That is power, not through aggression or show, but through clarity, integrity, and strategic independence. Every move you make, every decision you hold, every silent observation you maintain, signals depth, capacity, and potential that demands attention. And the higher the level of scrutiny, the more unmistakable the truth becomes. You are not ordinary, you cannot be contained, and the world around you is forced to account for your presence, whether it wants to or not. Remember this: being noticed by those who believe they are in control isn't a threat. It's proof that you are exceptional, that your trajectory cannot be calculated, and that your impact is far more powerful than surface-level observers understand. Embrace it, recognize it, and let it guide you to operate intentionally, knowing that your every step carries weight beyond what is visible. If this message resonated with you and you want to continue uncovering insights like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button to show your support. Comment below to share your thoughts and experiences, and share this with anyone who needs to understand what it truly means to be recognized for who they are, not for what others expect them to be. The journey is just beginning, and your awareness is your greatest advantage. God bless you.